So now we're going to talk about some of the features you should look for in virtualization products as you're learning them or as you're evaluating them for deployment. All of them will do a lot of the same kinds of things. You share hardware, you manage your environments. They'll do things like hardware virtualization. Um, you'll have administrative and user consoles. They'll provide disk support, the ability to save your state, do things like parenting and cloning and moving, networking support, migration, etc. Now, some of these things are only going to be available in the server. Um, Moving VMs between different hypervisors from, say, a desktop to a desktop, you're basically going to have to shut it down and change it and things like that. You really have to have a server grade implementation to move a running VM. VMware calls this process vMotion. You can do things like parenting and cloning, etc. Um, in terms of hardware virtualization, um, there's our motherboard and processor support features. Some of these you may have to turn on in the BIOS. Say, for example, if you load a Type 2 hypervisor application, whether Hyper-V or via VirtualBox or VMware Workstation, and then you try to start a VM and it just won't let you, particularly if it tells you you need to turn on something in the BIOS, go do that, whether it's Intel's virtualization extensions or whatnot. AMD and Intel have slightly different nomenclature as far as that's concerned. But make sure those things are turned on, or you literally won't be able to run any virtual machines. Those virtualization extensions on the board help the hypervisors manage those multiple virtual CPUs. Like I said, you may have if you may have a single processor with a couple of cores on it, and if you're running 4 or 5 VMs simultaneously, obviously they can't all have a monopoly on those two processor cores. Um, they're going to have to share, and the hypervisor is going to have to tell each of them, "Hey, you've got a CPU to yourself." When really and truly, they don't. We also have some memory support features. Most of these are data center virtualization. Things like secondary layer address translation, ballooning. Ballooning will allow something like vSphere to look inside, as it were, a VMware, an OS running inside an EXXI host, figure out if it's using more memory than it really needs to, and issue it a command that will tell it to release that memory. So the guest OS isn't using it, therefore the host system can use it, give it to another VM, or just use it for its own background processing. Overcommitment is the process of actually having more VMs up and running than you actually have physical memory to support. Say, for example, you've got 16 gigs of RAM, and you're running, say, Windows 10. So it needs 4 gigs of memory by itself just to be happy. So that's 4. And you're running 5 VMs, and you've given each of them 4 gigs of RAM. So 4 times 6 is 24, which is larger than 16. That can still work because the chances that all those VMs are going to need all that memory at the same time is fairly limited, fairly remote rather. Still, though, if you have a VM, or a machine, physical or virtual, which is running at a large significant fraction of its processor or memory or hard drive capacity for an extended period of time, that's something you need to look at. That's one of the fun things about, you can use your performance monitor tools in Windows to watch it. If you notice that your disk is at 100% utilization all the time, figure out why. Is there a process that has hijacked your controller, as it were? Or do you really need to offload some of the work? Do you need more memory, etc.? Page compression, page sharing. So the hypervisor can take common sets of memory and add them together. The next thing I'm going to talk to, actually, hold on. So, yeah, page sharing, as the name suggests, involves this is specific to VMware. If you have multiple VMs that have more or less the same memory, same data loaded into memory. Say, for example, they're both running the same operating system, so they've got the same executable running. You might have a single piece of memory doing that job for multiple VMs. You can also figure out, okay, if you've got a piece of memory which is underutilized, compress it. Wait for it to be needed again before you uncompress it and use it. The next thing I'm going to do is talk about your administrative and user consoles.